Okay, if we can, we'll go ahead and bring the meeting to order this evening. This is the November 14th, 2019 meeting of the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Chris Jordan. I'm the chairman of this commission. I would like to remind all of the commission members and those in the audience, if you would, to silence our electronic devices. And for anyone that is speaking, the commission members, if you'd make sure to turn on your microphone, and those of you in the audience, if you would, please, speak clearly into the microphone. With that, we'll introduce ourselves. We don't appear to have a council liaison tonight, so we will start with Mr. Yarnell.
Good evening. My name is Chris Yarnell.
Mike Lester.
Jack Deacon.
Penny Quigg.
Beth Sweeten.
Dale Vaughn.
Bunny Tricky Cotton.
Blake Marcus.
Eric Barron with the planning manager.
Anna Naniski, city planner.
Ian Zollinger, city planner.
Sonny Sanders, director of planning protective services.
Brian Wolford.
Jamie Abbott, neighborhood services manager.
Very good. Thank you, guys. With that, we'll move to procedural matters. The city code authorizes 9 regular members and 3 alternates. Alternates are designated to vote upon the absence or disqualification of a regular member. A quorum of 5 members or alternate is necessary to conduct business. We do have some absentees tonight. Regular members missing this evening is Michelle Mahoney and Dean Dutoy. Alternates are Emily Fretwell and Hank Vogt. Is there any members this evening that are here that will be disqualifying themselves from any agenda item? I do know Mr. Yarnell said he needs to leave around 6, and Mr. Lester said 6:30. So hopefully we're moving right along and we won't have to deal with those issues this evening. With that, we do have a quorum with the following voting members: Chris Yarnell, Michael Lester, Dale Vaughn, Jack Deacon, Bunny Tricky Cotton, Blake Marcus, and Penny Quigg. We have one case this evening. It is case number P19020. It is the adoption of the Jefferson City Historic Preservation Plan Comprehensive Plan Amendment. I believe Anna is going to be presenting that tonight. Sure, there is no need for a continuance.
No.
Obviously, no reason to reorder the agenda. With that, Ian, are you going to give us the order of testimony?
Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to briefly describe the procedures of the Commission. The proceedings of the meeting are being recorded, so please step forward to the microphone when you speak and give your name and address for the record. The standard order for each case is as follows. After introduction of the request by city staff, the applicant or their consultants will provide information on the request. The opening presentation by the applicant shall be limited to 10 minutes unless additional time is granted by the Commission. The applicant shall have 3 additional minutes for closing testimony if requested. We will then ask to hear from supporters of the request. We will then ask to hear from opponents of the request. We will then ask to hear from anyone else who wishes to speak on the request. Testimony shall be limited to 3 minutes each unless additional time is granted by the Commission. City staff will then make their recommendations on the request. In order to reduce the time necessary to hear an application, references to printed material, including staff reports and applicable findings, shall not be read into the record unless directed by the Commission. The Commission will close testimony from the floor. The Commission will then discuss the proposal, then publicly make its determination with reasons. The form of the motion shall be positive, that is, the motion shall be made to accept the request as presented or with modifications, stipulations, or conditions. A final vote will be taken with ayes in favor, nays opposed. The chairman shall announce the results of the vote, specifying the number of votes cast in favor and the number of votes cast against. The following documents are entered as exhibits for all items under consideration at this meeting: the City Code of the City of Jefferson as amended, the Comprehensive Plan and Land Use Map, copies of applications under consideration, a list of property owners to whom notices were sent, the affidavit of publication of the public notice in the newspaper, copies of drawings, plans, and/or renderings under consideration, letters of memoranda from staff, staff reports, minutes of proceedings, correspondence or other materials submitted by the public or the applicant, rules of procedure for the Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. These items are public record and available for inspection in the Department of Planning and Protective Services or through the office of the city clerk. Please be advised that any items that are presented, distributed, or otherwise received pertaining to the cases under consideration become the property of the Commission. This includes any photographs, drawings, petitions, and letters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Appreciate that. Would like to announce that our alternate, Emily Fretwell, has made it to the meeting, so we're glad you made it here, and you will be voting on agenda items with us this evening. Yep. At this point, we will move on to the adoption of the agenda. I will entertain a motion when someone is ready.
I move to adopt the agenda.
We have a motion, a second. Any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 8-0. City staff has provided us with the minutes from our regular meeting of October 10th. I will entertain a motion once the commission has a chance to look through those, and if there's no changes, we will move forward.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries 8-0. Is there any communications for tonight's items?
Only what is in the packet. One item.
We do have some correspondence from Brian Bernsketter, from the Government Affairs Director of the Jefferson City Area Board of Realtors. That's the only one that I would see in here. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Staff, commission members can look at that and take that into consideration this evening. We will move on to new business and public hearings. The case we have tonight is case number P19020. It's the adoption of the Jefferson City Historic Preservation Plan Comprehensive Plan Amendment. Anna, I believe you're going to present that this evening. Please.
Okay. So as many of you know, our department has been working on the historic preservation plan for Jefferson City for quite a while. And so today I'm going to talk about the contents of this plan with you guys. And this plan is being proposed to be adopted into the comprehensive plan, and this is specifically why you guys are hearing this, because you guys are the keepers of the comprehensive plan. And this is important to do because any programs or policies or code changes that affect the built environment, it's important for those items to align with the comprehensive plan. The plan was approved by the Historic Preservation Commission on October 22nd, and they seem very excited to use this plan as an organizational guide for their future historic preservation efforts. So first things first, what is a comprehensive plan? The Jefferson City Historic Preservation Plan will provide the community with a focus document specifically concentrating on the city's unique issues and opportunities to guide historic preservation efforts throughout the city. So there are lots of historic assets here in Jefferson City. I'm sure everyone has their favorites, and this plan will help us all work together to leverage and preserve those historical assets in a productive way. Before I get into more of the contents of the plan, a couple of things for everyone to remember: that the recommendations within this plan does not force anything to change automatically. So the recommendations that I bring up tonight, recommendations that you've read in the plan, they will not cause automatic implementation. And that this plan is for everyone to use. Historic Preservation Commission, City Council, City staff, other historic preservation stakeholders, and the public can all use this plan to spearhead and focus their historic preservation efforts. This is a timeline that we've undergone for this plan. We've gone through phases 1 through 4 and are currently at the very end of phase 5. This process started in late 2018 when the city put out an RFP for the historic preservation plan, and we hired the consultants Heritage Strategies to develop the historic preservation plan. Then in phase 2, the consultants had their first visit, they began their research and analysis, and they met with the Historic Preservation Commission. In phase 3, we saw the beginning stages of public engagement, And then in phase 4, they drafted a plan through all of that public engagement and research and analysis. Then in phase 5, we've reviewed that draft plan, made edits to it because of the staff and public input, and then now we've put it in front of HPC and the Historic Preservation Commission. And there will also be a informational meeting presentation in front of City Council. So I'm going to go a little bit more into the community engagement because I really want to drive home the fact that the public and stakeholders were involved through this whole process. We have formed a historic preservation plan focus group, and that helped guide the planning process and helped keep stakeholders and the public involved. And then interest group sessions were also held, and those were held to help form the planning themes that were the base of the goals and strategies of the plan. I'll get more into those details later, but we had historic neighborhoods, commercial and institutional nodes, historic preservation and storytelling, and tourism interest group sessions. We also held several public meetings. Oh, sorry. Okay, sorry. Soft-spoken, and I'll get closer. Okay. And we also had several public meetings and kept the Historic Preservation Commission involved through this whole process. So, plans are also are multi-leveled. So they're built with this ladder in mind to help change wants to actions. So I'm going to go over these things in this order to showcase the concepts of the plan. We'll have the vision statement, which is the guiding essence of the plan, the goals, which are value statements that help put that vision into motion, and then the strategies, which are action statements that help make the goals a reality. So first things first, vision statement. This is the vision statement for the plan, and it was created by the consultants through their understanding of our history and where the community wants to go. And remember that the vision statement is created to help shape our direction and the purpose for the historic preservation plan. And the vision statement reads, "Residences and businesses in Jefferson City recognize the central role that heritage plays in community identity and quality of life. Our attraction to the city is infused with the sense of the city's landscapes and how they have grown and changed over time. We value the physical and spiritual connections between the places we create today and the places created by our forebears. We view our identity and quality of place as an asset, and the cultivation and enhancement of which draws new businesses, visitors, and residents to our region." Good sentiment. So now I'm going to move on to the goals. And remember that these are value statements that helps put that vision statement that I just read into motion. So the first goal is reinforce the role of Jefferson City's historic core as central to the city's identity and long-term economic development strategy. Emphasize quality of place. So quality of place is the physical characteristic of the community and how that space is well designed, planned, developed, and maintained, and how those affect the way we use the space, its characteristic, the way people interact with it, and the way people feel about it. So the better quality of place, the more people want to be there and experience that place. So downtown, for example, has a very distinct quality of place. The way it looks, the way Jefferson City's culture feels about it, etc. Goal 2. Activate and revitalize Jefferson City's historic commercial centers and residential neighborhoods as distinctive places for living and investing. Goal 3. Connect the city's historic core to its outlying suburban historic neighborhoods through transportation enhancements, parks, open space, trails, bikeways, programming, public facilities, and other initiatives. So we don't want the benefits of historic preservation to just be isolated. This type of activity can be really beneficial for multiple areas in Jefferson City. And when they're all connected properly, then there are rippling effects that benefit the whole community. Goal 4. Use the city's historic preservation neighborhood services planning programs strategically to stimulate private investment in the revitalization of historic areas. And goal 5, actively engage residents and visitors with information, interpretation, and programming that reinforces community identity and tells the city's stories. So this is also in the wayfinding and identity category. For example, the wayfinding sign that you can see there in the background that's featured in downtown. So residents and visitors, they need to understand and be very connected with Jefferson City as a distinctive place. And this goal shows that there's an importance to that continued use and the need to be a part of the community. It's very much like brand recognition and wanting to see that all throughout the community. So I went through the vision statement, I read through the goals, now moving on to strategies. And I'm just going to go over a few highlights. There are a lot more listed within the plan. And remember that strategies are the action items to make those goals a reality. And there are also several overarching themes to the strategies that have been developed to help organize and categorize the strategies within this plan. So the first theme is general historic preservation. And this is about coordinating historic preservation tools and resources with various revitalization and enhancement strategies. So the first strategy I'm going to go over is A1, and that involves continuing the use or continued participation of the Certified Local Government Program, or CLG. And this is jointly administered through the National Park Service and the State Historic Preservation Offices. Communities like us, we work through a certification process to become recognized as a CLG, and we've been one since 2004, and the participation in this program allows us access to certain benefits while we follow certain criteria. And the benefits of this program include funding, so we can have access to various grants and technical assistance from like SHPO, so we can get access to technical services involving surveys, nominations, different trainings, assistance with the commission. And then there's general like sustainability benefits, where when we lift up and support our historic areas, there's general economic, environmental, and social benefits. And this also ties in with A3, where it suggests that we continue to survey historic neighborhoods using CLG grants. This has been done recently, actually, with the West Main Street Architectural Survey. This is a map of the results of that survey, where now the neighborhood has a professional analysis of the historical assets that are in their community, and they can use this information to develop future national or local nominations. You can see that there's the lime green, which is all the contributing buildings, and then a few individually eligible for different listings for the National Register. So a few more recommendations in this theme is A10, where they want to see us continue to identify local landmarks and also providing more information involving the appropriate maintenance and revitalization of historic properties. So we want people to feel empowered and that they have enough information to invest in historic properties. Next strategy theme involves planning and development, and this involves aligning historic preservation strategies with planning programs and processes. The first recommendation in the strategy theme involves the comprehensive plan update and coordinating the vision for community identity and quality of place as an organizing concept with the comprehensive plan. I am also involved with the comprehensive plan process, so it's definitely safe to say that community identity and quality of place are in fact aligning themes with that document. And with B5, this involves strengthening our connection to parks, trails, signage, and an interpretation system. So this generally means that public spaces should exhibit a connection between the visitors and the physical landscapes so that it is functional and tells a story about the place. So these are a few examples of interpretive signs. You can see that they are both informational and interactive. There's a few of these signs on the MSP site, and I believe that there are plans to incorporate similar looking signs in Community Park, but we definitely think that there are more sites in Jefferson City that would be appropriate for these types of signs. Another strategy in this theme involves community education, going back to that strategy that I mentioned in the general historic preservation section, where there needs to be a common understanding of the codes and the building requirements associated with historic structures. Again, so people have the information, they know the processes, they feel very, very comfortable in investing in historic structures. That's better for all of us, property owners and the city as a whole. Third strategy theme involves commercial centers and how they are a source of economic activity. The first strategy underneath this theme that I'm going to talk about is the Main Street approach and how the plan encourages us to strengthen that use in Jefferson City. So the National Main Street Center is a subsidiary of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and the Main Street program specifically focuses on revitalizing older and historic commercial districts to build those vibrant neighborhoods and thriving communities. They use this four-pronged approach to leverage and achieve and maintain healthy historic commercial centers and nodes. So that involves economic vitality, really supporting entrepreneurship and diverse economic opportunities, design, again making sure that the aesthetics of the space, they both boost the historic character that is in place and is functional for the people who are using it, organization, leadership, and partnership to help make those spaces successful. Rarely do things, happen organically. It really takes community stakeholders and champions to make implementations work. And promotion, which again is about brand recognition and local buy-in. So a lot of communities across the nation have joined or aligned themselves with this Main Street approach, and they have found that this methodology is successful. So the plan recognizes that we need to do this as well. And then a few more strategies within this theme section involves overlay districts. They recommend that a overlay district be established for downtown. One is in place for the Capitol Avenue area, if you are familiar, and the plan also recommends establishing a multi-site CID, Community Improvement District, that can encompass multiple historic centers. So the Dunklin Street, Old Munich area currently has one, and they've used those funds to fund certain infrastructure projects for the area. And the idea of having a multi-site one is that smaller nodes that maybe couldn't generate a lot of revenue by themselves, everyone pulling their money together, bigger impacts could happen for everyone if everyone works together. So then the next strategy theme is historic neighborhoods, which involves, again, leveraging historic neighborhoods as unique residential living opportunities. The first strategy that this involves includes developing neighborhood associations, so residents can feel very connected to their physical space and their neighbors, and also having design guidelines, again, that education piece, illustrating appropriate treatments for historic structures so property owners can have recommended avenues for rehabilitating their property. Now, guidelines and standards sometimes can be used interchangeably, and we sometimes maybe think of them as the same thing. But for the purpose of how these words are used in this document, I'm going to kind of highlight those lines. So guidelines are recommended and voluntary design practices. So for example, in the case with the West Main neighborhood, they now have this architectural survey that highlights their architectural styles that are significant for their area. The neighborhood could come together and say, hey, let's form a guide for our other neighbors if they choose to update their property or rehabilitate their property in a way that they want to fit in with their surrounding neighborhoods. They'd have a document that would outline that information out. But the standards are regulatory. For example, with the overlay district, the property owners in the Capitol Avenue overlay district have to conform to certain standards, design standards, that are outlined in our code. So those are the differences. The strategy that was recommended right here in D6, that involves the voluntary method. So then, the last strategy theme for you guys involves tourism and how Jefferson City can use this as a tool for economic development and revitalization. So, for example, the plan states that we should continue our use of the wayfinding and signage. Mentioned this several times before already, but yes, this helps residents and visitors get around the city and be notified of landmarks in Jefferson City. Jefferson City also needs to uphold the culture of having local historians and historic preservation stakeholders research and document our history because, having it on paper, having it remembered benefits our story for a long time. That's why we all care about historic preservation. Here are some examples. There's several books that have been published about Jefferson City. We want to keep that culture alive, making sure that those authors and those stakeholders feel that they are supported in continuing to practice that. There's another example of the wayfinding sign that we see throughout downtown. Could very well be incorporated through more parts of Jefferson City, and increasing the digital presence in creative branding strategies for Jefferson City. It would help Jefferson City keep up with today's trends and keep Jefferson City on people's radar. So for example, the Jefferson City Convention and Visitors Bureau, they just commissioned a really nice video that highlights some of Jefferson City's landmarks, and it's just a nice way to share and let people know about Jefferson City. So I've rambled on a lot, but that is the end of my presentation for the content of the plan. Really quick, I'll go over the timeline that we've been through. We had an informational presentation about the same subject at the December 10th P&Z Commission meeting. Did I say October? My apologies. Then the HPC, they approved this plan on October 22nd, and then today is November 14th. And again, the City Council will receive a informational presentation on December 16th. I am happy to answer any questions about the plan, either highlights that I gave today or maybe some that you've read in your packet.
Thank you, Anna. I appreciate you informing on that again, and I'll open it up to the commissioners. Do you all have any questions at this point from Anna or any other city staff?
I have one. So on the auto implementation, tell me, not cause for, what does that mean? Is if we were to vote this through today?
Yes. So I was trying to allude the fact that if this is approved today, that doesn't mean any of the recommendations are automatically going to happen. Like
So
they
what
still go through the normal processes of staff research, public involvement, go through city council and appropriate commissions. It doesn't necessarily mean that a strategy like the overlay district, for example, if you approve this today, that doesn't mean tomorrow you'll see that overlay district on top of downtown.
Okay, so it still would have to go through the proper
Correct.
steps of...
Correct.
So, in the packet for the strategies, you had a number of time frames. So, what does it mean, early, short-term, mid-term, in terms of time frame?
Those are recommended timeframes in the physical plan. Let's see if I have that version. They've got a implementation table in the back, which I don't. It outlines short term is like 1 to 3 years, and then midterm is about 5 years, and then long term is 8+.
So everything in here is strictly a recommendation, not a new code or new overlay district. If the uptown decides to have an overlay district, it's going to go through the normal processes again, public hearings, going through planning and zoning. So this does not change any code requirements throughout the city. Because reading through it, I mean, I'm not an attorney, and so I skim rather more quickly than I probably should. But it sounded like it was like a huge citywide homeowners association, and that made me a little nervous. And I saw that the realtors had some concerns, and I would really like to have you all address those concerns with the staffing of the board, different boards and commissions, and just how it operates, because sometimes it does seem to be one-sided.
I'll I'll hit on a couple of those notes, but make sure I answer all your questions for you. So the purpose of the plan is to provide a guide for all of us to use to be on the same page. So these are recommendations that we can all use to follow moving forward with historic preservation efforts. So everything listed in here will go through the appropriate processes once this plan is adopted. This is just us saying, yes, we're going to move forward potentially in these ways. And then Board of Realtors comments. So yes, we have received the comments and we forwarded the comments to the consultants when we received them. And they're the professionals, they wrote the plan, they consumed the comments and made those edits to the plan appropriately. If you want to go through specifically each, okay, did I miss anything?
I'd be interested in how it was edited, yes.
Okay, so like with comment 2, for example, where it states that there are a lot of people that are listed in the strategies, or in the people who are responsible for the strategies, and it seems like we're giving more favoritism to HPC. Well, the idea of having all of the stakeholders listed underneath the strategy is saying that all of these people can be involved with the strategy. We're not forcing any of those people to be responsible for said strategies, but it is acknowledging that those people should be involved. And then with number 3 in the demolition ordinance, the plan does not specifically call out to rewrite the whole demolition ordinance. The plan specifically calls out demolition by neglect, and us trying to prevent demolition by neglect. And addressing that in our code would not call for a complete rewrite of the demolition code. And the rest of the strategies, or the rest of the comments, I assume were taken by neutral stance of the consultants, because, again, the strategies, the recommendations in the plan are recommendations, and they are providing us with several avenues to solve issues that they've identified in our community. Did I answer the questions?
I'll just try to add a little. As Anna mentioned, the plan is full of recommendations. There's a lot of recommendations within the plan. She touched on mostly highlights in her presentation, but going through the full text of the plan and looking at every individual recommendation, I don't think it would be expected that anyone would be completely in favor of every single thing contained in this plan. But what it does is it does give a good roadmap to the future, things to consider as the historic preservation is looked at within the community. I don't think you have to be in favor of everything in there, but in favor of looking at it as a possibility is basically what the plan is my view of the plan and the planning process. Regarding some of the specific concerns of the Board of Realtors, and I believe that these comments were sent at a very early phase in the planning process, and so they were transmitted to the consultants while they were still developing the plan. So they did look at the comments while drafting the plan. Some of the things I think were able to be incorporated in the plan, some not, because some of them were very policy oriented. And there's certain desires I think that are expressed here to not pursue certain policies. But and I could maybe even share in some of those concerns. The demolition ordinance, oh my gosh, took a year out of my life. But to completely ignore that topic within a historic preservation plan would be very, very awkward. I don't think there's any strong desire to crack that egg open again. But there could be something in the future that necessitates a relook at the demolition ordinance for one reason or another. And same with, with overlay districts. We don't have a whole lot of experience with overlay districts, but don't feel it'd be really appropriate to eliminate it as a potential tool. And it is a very common way of pursuing historic preservation within a community. I think a lot of the protections, I would hope that a lot of the protections that, that people out there might fear are built into the process, that if an overlay district is going to occur within a certain area, it's going to have to be supported publicly, by the people, the property owners within that area. Otherwise, it'll never make it through a political process. And so, I think, a lot of the some concerns were addressed within the drafting of the plan, specifically. I think there were concerns about, specific references to public interest groups. I think we shared some of that too. It just needs to be very clear that this plan is being adopted and is held by by the publicly appointed agencies, not by private interest groups. Overall, I hope that gives a little bit more color on some of our responses. As I mentioned, there's a lot of recommendations in there. Certainly wouldn't expect someone to be in favor of all of them, but in general, they are comprehensive, they are professional, and we think that they're while they may not all occur, we think that they would give a good guide as to what to pursue into the future.
The one thing that I didn't hear either one of you talk about was I'm not sure how on the historic preservation this is relevant, incorporating a rental inspection program. I'm not sure how those two go hand in hand. I mean, obviously there's historical properties that are rental properties, but there's also brand new properties that are rental properties. So I just not am sure, I'm confused as to why this is.
And so it is a fear, I think, amongst the community and amongst staff that a lot of demolition by neglect out there is taking place. And, a rental inspection program is one possible method to address some of that. It may not be the only one, but it is certainly worth something worth looking into. And so I think there is an attachment to historic preservation in terms of trying to address this situation where a lot of the older homes in the community are literally we watch them fall apart because of neglect, and also a lot of the older housing stock in the community is not necessarily this has a high violation rate when it comes to a lot of the code enforcement property inspection activities undertaken by our department. And so it's not a completely detached topic when it comes to historic preservation. We think the two are attached, and so that's why it's in the plan.
But basically, because it's just we're just getting the ball rolling, we'd have more time later on down the road to actually look into it and discuss what that entails.
Oh, certainly, a property inspection program would be a very intensive discussion for the community.
And I think part of the letter from the Jeff City Area Board of Realtors was just the fact that it was so broad and not detailed, but the fact that we'll have a chance to look at it closer, then I guess, yeah.
I just want to wrap my head around this. Everything that we're looking at today are things that will be mostly individually taken apart and discussed as we do them. You're talking about additional responsibilities and duties for staff or committees. Each one of those will be looked at individually, and then council or somebody will then make a decision that will be a public decision on each one of those, and I'll offer opportunity, whether it's additional responsibilities or it's a new program, or is that correct?
Correct. Everything will go through the appropriate processes appropriate for said strategy.
And there will be the opportunity for more discussion on each individual item as we go through this.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. I would like to know, when you talk about the historic value of these properties, What is the current age limit on the house before these will affect the properties? When will they?
So the
I guess my question is, does the house have to be 30 years old, or does it have to be 100 years old to be affected by this?
Okay. I'm Jamie Abbott. I am the liaison to the Historic Preservation Commission. Historic preservation in general, to be on the National Register, which goes through a long process, a detailed documented process, the property has to be at least 50 years old. But that's to be on the National Register. As the Historic Preservation Plan points out, is to survey our city, which is documentation, documenting the style of the house, whether or not it's contributing or non-contributing to our community's history. So that's I would like to point that out. It's a main component of the Historic Preservation Plan is to survey our community. It's not by professionals. It's nothing of an opinion, an uneducated opinion, if that helps.
I'll add to that just a little. If you're looking for a number, that magic number is 50 years old. I don't think that really means a whole lot, though, because it's just a threshold number used by the historic preservation community as kind of the checkmark box to go to the next level, which really is the analysis of that specific property and whether or not it's historic. Nothing, it's not saying everything 50 years old is historic. That's not what historic preservation is. And so one of the recommendations of the plan, I think one of the key recommendations is basically surveying out the city, finding out what is historic and what is not. Mapping that out is my personal strong desire to try to map that out better so that the community and everyone involved can really come to an agreement as to what is historic and what is not, or what scales of history, historicness there is out there. And so that's one recommendation that's built into the plan, is to do a better job of surveying out the area to make those distinctions.
So in a sense, you're telling me that it's a rule of thumb, it's around 50 years of age, but then it's also getting back to the discretion of the surveyor of whether or not it's historic or not.
I don't think a rule of thumb 50 years of age is accurate or correct there. That's just one threshold that, in addition to being 50 years old, the property has to meet certain criteria, and those criteria are lined out. There's I forget 8 or 9 of them, and that's what determines if something is historic, not just 50 years. So it's really the criteria.
And again, to reiterate what the other commissioners have asked, that this document is purely just a guide, a roadmap, ideas to move forward with. One of the things that I struggle with, and I've sat in your seat before, and I'm a proponent of what the city's trying to do, is in 2 places it references adding more staff. And to me, it looks like review staff. To me, we need enforcement staff. Whether it's physically the people in the field being able to get into properties that are deteriorating, or go to the effect of police officers. So, I guess for me tonight, I like to hear that this is a recommendation, and none of these are set in stone at this point, but I struggle with the fact that first thing we do is try to put more layers on people wanting to do something for Jefferson City, whether it's remodel a property or whatever the case may be, and we're sitting there making them go through the review process and not get on with the job of doing the property, getting it where it needs to be, and then somebody in the field following it up. Because I think we can all drive around Jefferson City and see code violations everywhere. And to Penny's comments that's come on numerous times in the last 5 to 10 years, we've seen a pure deterioration of properties. Now, is that a fault of the community as the owners? Yes. But we also need more people in the field to help the current staff that we have. Guess my soapbox there. So with that, does anybody else have any other comments?
I got a scenario. If, like, say, for example, in the Capitol Avenue area where Avenue HQ was torn down, and somebody wanted to rebuild there, does that property would have to look historic with so there'd be an architectural committee, correct? And then they had to build it to historical look. But on the inside, it could have all of the amenities of a new property.
Well, that is a complicated specific scenario there. But in general...
Should we talk about 200 East High?
In general, yes, there's going to be some review on the design of that. There's two different methods of having that review process in place. Anna described them, kind of a little bit. I mean, there's kind of a subjective process or an objective process. In the Capitol Avenue case, it's an overlay district.
Right.
And so we'd really be looking at the overlay district.
Right. And it would only pertain to the overlay district, right? If
Yeah.
it wasn't in the overlay district, then anybody could really build whatever they wanted up to city code.
Correct. Yep. Now, in Avenue HQ's specific instance,
of
it's
course,
actually zoned PUD, so the review body would be the Planning and
Right.
Zoning Commission. And, and so hopefully someday we'll have a chance to take a look at a rebuild on that property.
Got it. Okay.
Is there any other questions for city staff from the commission members? Okay. At this point, city staff has informed me that we do have another speaker on this request. Mary Shantz is going to come forward. Mary, if you would, come forward. Please state your name and address for the record. Speak into the microphone, and we'll let you present what you have this evening.
Can you hear me? My name is Mary Shantz. I live at 1928 Hazelton Drive in Jefferson City, and I'm the current chair of the Historic Preservation Commission. Chairman Jordan and members of the Planning and Zoning Commission, thank you for the opportunity to come tonight, and I'll be brief in my comments. As Anna very clearly laid out, this was a long process. There was a lot of public input, a lot of stakeholders, and the Historic Preservation Commission was very involved in all the work that the consultants did from the beginning to the end. We worked with the stakeholder groups. I think they were called interest groups. We sat on those committees. So we're very involved in this process. They came back, we had discussions, they made revisions. The realtors' comments and others were taken into accord from the public meetings. The consultants would come back again. So this was a long process. In the end, the Historic Preservation Commission did approve this, as Anna said, on the 22nd of last month with a unanimous vote. We believe that we need this roadmap for the city. We think it's going to help our city leaders, staff, and all the various boards and commissions that are going to be impacted by this plan in their work to assure that we give appropriate treatment to our city's historic buildings, neighborhoods, structures, history, the assets, the historic assets of Jefferson City. We do take very seriously our role as the experts in historic preservation, and to assure that we're providing the city with the best and most knowledgeable information. We work closely with organizations like Historic City of Jefferson, SHPO, the State Historic Preservation Office, and others to confirm and bolster and work with us on decisions. I just wanted to point out a couple of quick things. The Historic Preservation Commission has kind of become involved in having some special meetings to look at the specific recommendations that were in this plan. And there were two that I just wanted to highlight. This is going to be an ongoing process with us, but there are two. One is that because there's going to be more, I think, of a relationship between all of us, the staff, planning and zoning, historic preservation, are going to start asking members of the Historic Preservation Commission to come and start attending planning and zoning meetings, and we hope you all might do the same and come and attend our meetings, because we're going to have more and more issues, I think, over the years that will work together. In addition to that, Anna mentioned the West Main survey, that it includes the area, you all know them, the circles, North Circle, South Circle, East-West Circle. I've now talked about and would like to get together the people in that neighborhood specifically. They held a public meeting for the neighborhood to come after the surveys were done. And there was such interest from the residents there in looking at their neighborhood to perhaps establish a new local historic district. So one of the things that we're going to do also would be to look at that neighborhood, have a community meeting, expand the knowledge to the neighborhoods about historic buildings and neighborhoods. So this roadmap, I guess you'd call it, or this guidelines that can be used by all of us, you all, us, and the city. I think it's just what, I think, Chris, you used the word roadmap. Others have used plan. I mean, it's nothing is set in concrete. It's just going to give us a way of looking at things. So I hope that you will consider these guidelines seriously and give them your due consideration and approve them so they can move on forward to the City Council. I'll be glad to answer any questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mary. Is there any questions for Mary?
Tell me how you feel about incorporating a rental inspection. I mean, how does...
At the Planning and Zoning Commission, at the Historic
where we're
Preservation Commission meeting, thank you. This actually came up. It was one of the issues. Demolition by neglect is a big issue, and it's been a big issue for the Historic Preservation Commission. I mean, all of us are sorry and saddened when we see a building be demolished by neglect. We do have some realtors on the Historic Preservation Commission, and there was concern about that particular thing, but it was pointed out, as it has been tonight, that this is just a guideline. This is just a recommendation. It would have to go through all the regular processes to become code. So there would be public meetings. It would come before a commission like yours. Decisions would be made. Staff would have their input, and ultimately the City Council would make a choice.
I understand, but I'm not sure with the relevance. Can you explain that to me? I mean, why you feel it's important that it be on there?
Well, I think
I'm still
that
confused. I'm just still not.
It seems that if a historic building is demolished by neglect, it lessens the value. It lessens our community when we've lost one of our historic buildings or a structure that falls to disrepair.
I mean, so that's just in general, historic building inspections then, and not, why rental, I guess. I don't know. Am I misunderstanding something here? Or, I'm just not sure why it's...
Probably because majority of the rental properties in Jeff City that are historic, that landlords don't really care.
I think that...
Or they, they're Section 8 and the tenants don't care.
I would defer to staff for a more specific, absolute answer. However, Bunny, it seems to me that Dale got the message. That's the issue. What we're seeing is a lot of the rental properties are the ones that are falling into disrepair, and they're not being repaired. And then eventually they come before the Historic Preservation Commission and say, "Well, we don't have any choice. We have to tear this building down because it's in such bad repair." But it's been 20 years getting to that point of bad repair. And so,
but what if it wasn't a rental property, just a regular? I mean, it would still, and again, goes, deferring back to Chris's comment. I mean, who are we having do these inspections? And I don't know. It just is.
Well, I'm assuming it would go if something like that were to ever pass and it went through the City Council, it would be a city staff code inspection probably somehow through that.
Which,
again, I can't really get into the particulars because I don't know how the staff would do it if the City Council were to pass something like that and move it on to them.
Mr. Chair, may I? Just some interesting statistics. In 2019, the city did 145 property maintenance abatements. 140 of those were on rental and abandoned buildings. 5 were on owner-occupied properties. $37,000 was spent exclusively on 12 property owners of rental properties and abandoned building properties. That is one of the reasons why rental inspections are important to preventing these historic buildings from decaying and falling in disrepair.
Those were all historical buildings then? Would have been considered historical buildings?
I was delineating rentals and property violations and maintenance violations.
Right, but I'm just asking, is it historical?
I would think the majority of those would be, I know the abandoned buildings, the majority of those are way over 50 years old and most of the rental stock and the parts of the town where these abatements occur are in the core part of the city where the majority of the housing is older than 50 years. That doesn't mean there's not a ranch-style house off Primrose or someplace like that.
No,
There's something going
but
on.
I mean, I'm just asking
The majority of them
if
are.
the 145 were targeted historical properties is what we're talking about here.
I don't know if they meet all the requirements of being historical, but that benchmark of 50 years, certainly, most of them are in that.
And now abandoned, are they automatically considered rentals if they were abandoned? or-
They're just not owner-occupied. A lot of the abandoned buildings probably were rentals at one time, and they just degrade so much where a lot of people walk away from them or they pass away.
So do we know how, of that 140, how many were abandoned, how many were rentals?
Jamie, do you know that? It is.
So in general, Jefferson City has a approximately a 42-43% rental rate versus the owner occupation rate. The housing stock in Jefferson City is 68% of it is older than 1970. So when having those statistics and the core of the code enforcement happening in the core of our older housing stock areas, which is quote-unquote the Old Town area. I don't have those figures exactly of vacant versus rental, but the majority of the properties, once they've been rented out and no longer habitable, people walk away and they become abandoned. So statistically, honing in on this one piece that has been a rental inspection program that has been in other plans that have been adopted by the council, or by this commission, I should say, such as the historic Southside whole Munich-Berg plan had the rental inspection program outlined in it as well. So those figures, we can get those for you specifically if you like, but
I mean, you just threw out 140 and you said abandoned and rental. I mean, was it, 70 abandoned and 70 rental? Are we assuming all 140 were at some point rental properties, or, I mean,
well, given the statistics that, okay.
So of the abatements, 51 of the abatements, 51, which is 35%, were rentals, and the other 61% were abandoned or / vacant. Vacant just means that no one's occupying it at the time, whether it's a rental or owner. It was not owner occupied. So,
since we're on the subject, would that be like an exterior inspection, or would you physically go into the property and inspect it? I mean, I know that the details are not laid out.
For a rental inspection program,
yeah, sure.
That is something that we haven't identified. It's just something that has been in adopted plans, and it's something that is a topic that comes to our attention often. So, as previously mentioned, if there was a rental inspection program, it would go through a vetted public process for the public, council members, and everyone to put their piece in on that. So we don't have anything identified. It's just a process or a potential program or outcome that is outlined in this map for us.
But this would be a moot point if we would just take care of code and violations as they stand, like Chris said. You can see if the building's falling apart. We just write them up instead of saying, it fell over yesterday. What happened to the 6 years beforehand? Really, if we would just write them up and do what's on the books, we wouldn't have to have any kind of inspections at all. I mean, I can drive down almost any street in town and find at least 2 or 3 violations from, I don't even want to get into it. We've been talking about it for years since it was complaint-driven, and nobody's going to call on their neighbors. The neighbors find out. It's just a backwards way of doing things. And the city looks terrible right now. I look at it like I'm a brand-new driver coming in town. It just looks bad. I mean, the streets don't look good. There's stuff growing in the curbs and the sidewalks. I'll get off my soapbox, but I mean, it's not a very pretty sight right now.
Okay, is there any other questions for Mary while she's up here? Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, this is a public hearing, so we're going to open up testimony for those in the audience this evening. a typical procedure is we ask anyone who wants to come up and speak in favor of this request to do so. We usually limit your testimony to 3 minutes or less. When everyone is done with those in favor, we move on to those that are opposed. Again, 3-minute limit. And then lastly, we ask that anyone that just like to speak on the request, they're not for it or against it, just want to voice their opinion. In this opinion tonight, we were going to do a one-time opportunity to come and speak, and then when everyone's done, we will move on with recommendations from there. So at this point, we will start. Is there anyone in the audience who'd like to come and speak in favor of this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record, please.
Donna Dietz, 720 East High. I'm president of Historic City of Jefferson, and we are very much in favor of the passage of this plan. We've been very participatory in the development of it, worked with the consultants as well as with staff on it. We participate in the Historic Preservation Commission as well. One of the things that we've found in a lot of the research we've done is the city has made efforts previously to look at historic preservation. They even commissioned a report back in the 1990s, middle of 1990s, spent over $50,000 getting a consultant to come in and do a similar plan, similar report, and then it laid on the desk and never did anything with it. As a result, we've had a lot of abandonment issues, a lot of demolition issues, one on East High that everybody keeps talking about that could have been dealt with if we had a plan in place to say this is what can happen with a building of this sort. So I encourage you all to go ahead and have a motion to pass this on to City Council. I think it's an important issue for us to be able to work with.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
Any questions for Donna while she's up here? Thank you for your testimony. Again, I'll ask if there's anybody who would like to speak in favor of this request. Please come forward and state your name and address.
I'm Holly Stitt. I'm the owner of Avenue HQ, or formerly known as Avenue HQ.
Holly, give us your address, please.
My address is 12727 Southview Drive, Holt Summit. I'm a person who's bought a lot of historic property here in Jefferson City and worked on renovating it, and I really think that we need to look forward of doing something like this, because there being one that had to take a building down that I really didn't want to, we need to have something here. At least it's a start. And I agree with Eric in the fact that it may not be acceptable for everything, but it's a start, and we need to have that because we haven't had anything. In your answer to Avenue HQ, I am underneath a PUD, but I stand with the thing that, you know, anybody who buys property into a historic area, they buy that for the uniqueness of that building. And if they're buying it for the uniqueness of that building, they're not going to put it in there unless there's some developer who wants something that doesn't fit. And one of the things that really drove me nuts about Avenue HQ was the fact that I had commercial buildings that didn't fit in that area. Now I have a chance to put something back that will fit in that area. And am I happy that it happened this way? Not exactly how I planned it, but at least now I can do that. In answer to the rental agreement, I've now bought 2 duplexes. One is a 100-year-old duplex, or it's actually a triplex that has been sat abandoned and windows missing on it and everything, that I had to look seriously at whether it was worth saving or not, and I chose to save it. And I think that is there, but the thing is I would want someone to rent it. I'm providing a home for somebody else to live in. It's not my own pride. It's somebody else's living in there. And I think we have too many times that we have landlords that don't necessarily, they care about the bottom dollar versus what they're providing for somebody else. And I've watched 529 East Capitol, I believe that's it, the Bishop building, the white building that's been on the corner, have kids run underneath a porch that didn't have columns. I had kids playing out there in a place that was not sanitary, and it's because we didn't have something to stop that is not right. You know, So I think that we need to have something in place to keep the families that are living there safe from the people who don't seem to worry about anything but getting rent and not putting it back in a building. So anyway, I hope we go forward with this. Like I said, I don't know if it's the end all, but at least it's a start of us going in a direction with a roadmap. Thank you.
Any questions for Holly? Thank you for your testimony. Is there anyone in the audience, again, that would like to speak in favor of this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Okay, seeing no one else, we'll move on to, is there anyone who would like to speak in opposition to this request? Please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Seeing none. Lastly, I'll ask, is there anyone in the audience who would like to speak on this request? If so, please come forward and state your name and address for the record. Again, seeing none. At this point, I will close public testimony. Anna, do you have any other comments or staff report that you'd like to give?
Nope, just that we recommend the approval, the adoption of this plan. We believe it to be a good guide for historic preservation efforts moving forward, and there is a form of motion at the end of the staff summary in your packet.
All right, thank you. At this point, I will ask the commission members, do you have any questions for Anna or other city staff? If not, I will entertain a motion. Again, as usual, it needs to be a positive motion, and then we will move forward with a vote.
I move to approve the resolution to adopt the Jefferson City Historic Preservation Plan as a component of the Jefferson City Comprehensive Plan.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Again, for everyone in the audience and those who will be seeing this on video, this will be forwarded to the City Council on December 16th.
Well, so since this has to involve the comprehensive plan, the Planning and Zoning Commission is actually the final resting place for this decision. There will be an informational meeting to City Council, just so they're aligned and up to date with the plan.
Okay. With that being said, it was a recommendation, a roadmap, as we said. So for members here tonight or anyone that's interested, obviously these things will be coming back up, whether it's a rental issue or other things, overlay districts, and we encourage everyone to be involved and get your voice heard. So, okay. We will move on to other business. Who's handling that tonight?
Ian stepped out, so I'll take this. These are the staff updates on cases that have gone before the City Council. First one, there is a zoning code amendment regarding medical marijuana testing and transportation facilities. If you'll recall, it was the third medical marijuana zoning code amendment that we brought before you. It went in front of the City Council and was approved. And so hopefully we have medical marijuana covered within the zoning code now, and hopefully we won't have to bring anything back to you. There are other medical marijuana code amendments that are currently in front of the City Council dealing with other things such as business licensing and various enforcement type things, but nothing zoning wise. The second bullet point on that list regarding short-term rentals, again, the zoning code amendment that would remove that special exception permit process for short-term rentals, Airbnb type rentals. It is in front of the City Council right now. There is a public hearing that is scheduled at the November 18th meeting, but they've already mentioned that due to the absence of the bill sponsor, in fact, at that meeting, they're going to postpone the vote on that to their first meeting in December, December 2nd, in which case they'll have a second public hearing. So there'll be two public hearings regarding that. So plenty of opportunity for people to comment and to weigh in on that subject in front of the City Council. And that is all I have for you.
Who is our council liaison? Is it still Carlos?
Mr. Carlos Graham, yes. I think he's been absent the last couple meetings. But
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I didn't know if maybe we had a change in the guard there and somebody kind of...
There you go.
Anything else from city staff?
No.
Okay, anything from the commission members? Okay, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for coming this evening.